Hey Justin, I'm here.
Hey Eugene, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
So I called you. I'm just kind of frustrated right now. I researched you. I researched several other tuners, so I landed on you, and I saw you did good work. I got boastful and stuff like that, so I appreciate that. But I'm really concerned about my tune, honestly, because I spent a ton of money getting my tune or getting my car built, getting all the exhaust parts, all the performance parts, whatever you want to call it. And I had it tuned, and I was really pumped up. I had an expectation of a certain number, and I didn't get it, and just seemed like the car wasn't much better than stock. Almost, it was a little bit better, but not much. But I just wanted to know, how do I know that this is it? This is a good tune. What is this? How do I figure this out? I don't get it. I did some research on how to log and stuff like that, so I got a log. I figured I'd show that to you. I have dyno graphs I can show you.
Sure, let's take a look. Why don't you? Let's start off by you. Let's take a look at the dyno graph. Let's see what that looks like.
Yeah, it's not on my phone. I'll have to send it to you.
All right. Well, okay, let's skip the dyno graph. Let's look at the log itself.
Okay.
Now, is this a log from the dyno graph, or is it just a separate log?
This is a separate log. This is something I did on my own.
Okay. Are there pulls in there? What do you have in there?
Yeah. It's not loading up home. There it is.
Sally, huh? Who's Sally?
That's my mama.
All right. That's taking a while to open there, isn't it?
It's an old computer. This is a hand-me-down.
Maybe that's why the car is slow.
Yeah, probably.
All right, let's see here.
What is this? See, this is what I don't understand right here. This kind of stuff. All these numbers. What does it mean? I get some of it. I get some of the terminology and all that, but I just don't. I don't get the graphing. I don't get the numbers. I don't get how it all kind of ties
right.
together.
Oh, looks like you got two copies of this thing open.
Oh yeah, I double clicked it. Sorry.
All right. See, what you got to do. The first step is you got to squint your eyes, and then if you blur the numbers enough, you see patterns in there. I'm just kidding. No, that's not what you have to do. So this first screen, it's a bit deceiving what this is, because people, I can't tell you how many times I've had guys tell me, oh yeah, I scrolled over here to time point, like they go somewhere in the middle, and I'll get screenshots, right? And people, like, they'll highlight like the time point values, and they'll look at knock cylinder 1, the value is really high. Is that a problem? And it wants me to smack myself in the head, because it's not the right way to view the data.
That's why I'm not going to be asking many questions. I'm just going to.
No, you can ask the questions. Just you got to. Yeah. So the key thing I like to do here is I look at minimum and maximum values. You see, I'm pointing those out, and that can be useful. Like if you want to know, like for example, your car pulled 9 degrees of timing, right
what
here,
is that?
-9. It means that when the ECU is listening to the noise level from the engine for each individual cylinder, that one or more of the cylinders has crossed threshold, ECU wants to reduce the ignition advance. It wants to retard the timing. The reason it wants to do that is because typically, assuming the noise from the engine is a result of a pressure spike, the fuel has become unstable, and that generally causes the spike in pressure, because the fuel burns unevenly. And when that happens, you have to reduce the cylinder pressure to stabilize the combustion. And so the way that that's generally done is by retarding the ignition advance. That again assumes that the noise is actually caused by detonation.
Okay.
So
is that something that I would feel like? Or is
no,
that
actually, it can be completely silent. It might be completely silent. You may not hear anything, or sometimes you might hear like a little metallic rattle. The most oftentimes you will hear it is under light load, because under light load, the car will run the most advanced. When you have less, when your air fuel mixture has a lot less, it's compressed a lot less, right? It's under kind of light load. You have to advance your ignition timing to get the best possible efficiency from the engine. And there's a lot of these types of patterns. So for example, under very high load, when you're, let's say, near a red line, the ignition advance you can advance it because there's less opportunity for detonation to occur under those conditions. So you can run more timing under high load at high RPM, but under low RPM at high load, you have to run less advance, partly because there's less opportunity for more opportunity for detonation to occur, and there's also the way that the mixture is compressed doesn't require as much advance as it would at a higher RPM. So it's a very complicated thing. I mean, no one's going to expect you to understand it the first go around, and I'm sure even the way that I'm describing it, there's probably I'm leaving out details, but you get the idea, right?
Yeah.
So, and of course, some vehicles are different. If you're using a different type of fuel, you can have a different situation there as well. Okay, so that's kind of disturbing that we see that there's a 9-degree correction in timing.
Why is that?
Why is what?
Why is that disturbing? That kind of makes me nervous.
It's too much. I mean, the ECU shouldn't be taking away 9 degrees of timing.
Okay.
It's not good.
Is that? I don't know. Is that? I guess I don't know the right question to ask in that one, but is that something that's in the tune itself? Is that so? How is that?
So that's I'll get into that in a minute. First, let's look at like some of these other parameters to see what they are, and just kind of get a sense of what's going on. So here I can see your engine speed is a bit high. So usually throttle cut or fuel cut's usually around 75, 7600, and you're a bit above that. So it looks like the rev limiter may have been raised here. What else do we have? Your injector duty is 97, which, it's stock injectors, I'm assuming. So, that's relatively normal for this setup. And you said that did you tell me earlier this is a high compression engine?
Yes.
What's the compression ratio on this engine?
11.5 to 1.
Okay, so you're going to be looking to reduce your ignition advance, because with a high compression motor, fuel that would normally require, let's say, 25 degrees of advance is going to require less advance than that. Otherwise, you're probably going to end up with a detonation event occurring pulling timing. So let's keep that in mind. See what else we have here. Manifold absolute pressure. Okay. You went 100 miles an hour. Okay. Yeah, let's look at some of this data now. All right, here's looks like you got a pull right here. Zoom into that pull. There we go. 2D graph mode. You know what? Let's go back, actually. Let's look at the ignition correction, because I'm more interested in that. Yes, see, there's a lot of activity here. A lot. So, what's a good spot to look at? Let's look at this one right here. This is interesting, because I think actually that spot is also where you had your pull, isn't it?
Roughly, yeah.
Or roughly after that somewhere.
Yeah.
So we'll zoom in there. Here we go. All right, so this is the area where your timing was pulled. So first thing I look at when I look at timing that's being pulled is I want to make sure, first thing I ask myself is the car running more advanced than it would be compared to, let's say, it being stuck? So how do you answer that question? So the way you do that is you have your ignition timing. This is the timing that the car ran. And then you have your ignition correction, which is how much timing was removed in order to run that timing. So you have your ignition correction. So here you can see, for example, at this point, your ignition correction was -6 and the timing was 28. So if you take 28 and you add 6 to it, you get 34. That was your target advance. The ECU was programmed by the tuner to run 34 degrees of advance here. So let's see how that compares to what the car would have done if it wasn't tuned. So ignition timing calculated. There's your calculated timing. So your calculated timing is actually lower than your actual timing. So it wanted to run 23 degrees, but it ran 28 with a target of 34. That's a lot of advance. Now, it's not uncommon to be able to add 4, 5, maybe 6 degrees under some conditions to the target timing. But with a high compression engine, you'd be adding less than that, if that much. You probably have to run a lot less timing than that. Again, depending on conditions. So let's take a look at also the AFRs between the banks. Here's your AFRs. Let's take out the calculated timing. Let's take out the correction and let's put the AFR target in. There we go. There's your AFR target. So over here where it had, let's say for example, another knock event, your target was 14.7 and both banks were, looks like slightly richer than that. So assuming the target was set correctly to begin with, the likelihood that the knock here is caused by the car running lean, it's unlikely. Assuming the target's set correctly, which is given the engine load. Let's take a look at the engine load, which is how hard the engine's working. The engine load's 21. No, over here it was 50. What's your engine speed? Basically, it's not working that hard. 50% load.
It was confusing to me because, you know, I had produced such a low number on a Mustang dyno, and everybody tells me I shouldn't be chasing a number. Yeah. But, you know, I have to choose some kind of number because...
Well, what you're failing to see, what you're failing to understand is that on the dyno, you're only visiting a very, very, very specific, isolated part of the timing map. So let me show you what I mean by that. Now, over here, we were taught, let's not forget why we did all this exercise here. This is us talking about what timing the car ran, recognizing that the ECU decided to pull timing, and then comparing the AFRs against the targets and looking at the actual timing versus the calculated timing and deciding whether or not things are set reasonable, which in this case, it looks like they're not. The next thing I would look at is the actual signals and the thresholds to see what those look like. Again, it can be very complicated to, you got to click continue so I can keep accessing your machine there. Okay. So what we're going to look at next is the, where's this thing? The actual individual knock data per cylinder. That's what we want to look at.
That's what I'm most concerned about too, is knock, because
well, you definitely, I would say you most likely have it. And the ECU is pulling timing for it.
Earlier you mentioned that, I believe you called it metallic rather.
Yeah, see like these spikes right here? You see how high above the threshold it's going? Now, it could be noise. It's possible. But given what we just saw here, that the ECU is running more timing than it normally would, and the AFRs are good, and it's a high compression motor, I would say all those things put together, that's telling me that, again, this is on 93 octane, that this motor doesn't want to run this timing, and that's probably a real detonation event. And sometimes if you don't hear it, the only way to confirm it is with an external device. So this is cylinder 2. Let's check cylinder 3. Actually, let's go back out here for a minute. Take a look at this right here. Go back in here. Yeah, this is kind of what it looks like. There's your threshold. Let me know if you have any questions as we're looking at this. You see here, you're crossing over the threshold, so that's probably why it's pulling timing.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was asking, is what are these really long dips and really long spikes, basically?
They're just noise levels from the from that particular cylinder, and then here it's being plotted against the threshold. It shows you when it crosses over. Now, it won't always pull timing, but usually it'll pull timing. We don't see every single event recorded here. It only shows some of the events. So sometimes you'll see timing pulled and nothing crosses, and other times you'll see something crosses and no timing is pulled. So this, again, isn't supposed to be used as like a one-size-fits-all way to make a conclusion. So, okay. So we looked at that. I don't think thresholds are set unreasonably high, and I think there is reasonable cause to think that the timing is too advanced on this tune. And as you know, over-advancing timing can actually cause the opposite effect of increasing power. You can actually lose power because the maximum cylinder pressure will happen too early, and instead of the piston coming up and then being pushed down, it kind of pushes on the piston as it's working its way up. So that can cause a problem. So I would guess that in this situation, that's probably what's happening, is that your motor is kind of working against itself, and that's why you're not making peak power.
I can feel it. That's why I'm here asking, man, because I can't accept it. It was even the second time I had a dyno run, I didn't run a dyno jet. The guy's like, yeah, you have more power to be had. I just don't know why it's not there. It was like, and then I've reached out to a ton of tuners.
Right. Have you done this type of analysis with anyone else? To try to look at the data and to see what's going on?
It was more so like I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking, but it was more like it was a burden to some people. It was that, you reach out to somebody, try to basically, I guess I'm thinking their time for free, so at this point until I make a purchase, but it was just like, whatever. That's kind of what I got from it. That's how I felt. It was just, there was no interest in earning or developing any kind of relationship. So.
Right. Well, my recommendation here is to start a new tune, and to maybe first start off by adjusting the knock sensitivity and getting it to the point where we know for sure that the ECU is pulling timing, or if it's not. And the way I would suggest doing that is pulling a bunch of timing out and setting stock knock sensitivity, or more sensitive than stock to an extent, depending on, I have some experience with this, so I have recommendations. But yeah, if you follow those recommendations and we check it out and we drive the car and we can get it to the point where the ECU stops pulling timing out, then that'll be a good baseline, and we can start adding timing. And if taking advance out or putting it back in, if that changes things, then that we can use that to shape our ignition timing map. But most likely on this motor, you're going to benefit the most by running E85.
So I definitely researched the idea that I have a very, very, very good setup from what I thought. Is it so? I guess my one question is with all of this, why didn't, if they car this quote unquote master tuners, if they tune the car, then why wouldn't this something they'd be able to pick up? Like isn't that something they would see? Like why would, is it just that this to me is what I'm gathering is this is basically like they did whatever the heck they wanted to just put me out the door.
Well, let's take a look at something else here real quick. So I'm going to open up a browser and show you what an ignition timing map looks like. That is not typing. What is all that? Did I type all that?
I'll give you some of that. There you go.
It's not typing. How come I can't type? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, you got to have control. So.
Okay, so ecutek. So let's say 370Z ecutek. Timing map. There we go. Perfect example here, right? So let's look at that one. Okay. So you can see here engine load, right? So when you're on the dyno and you're doing, let's say you're doing a pull, right? So like over here, you are doing a pull here, right? Engine speed's increasing, your accelerator pedal, it's all the way down, right? 4.6 all the way. Throttle position, all the way down the whole time, or open, right? So what you can do here is you can take a look at engine load. And this will tell you what engine load you have under full throttle on a dyno, for example, right? Very similar situation. All right. Now the engine load, which you can see here, is 115 over here. Over there it's 114. Here it's 113. Here it's 113. It's basically, for all intents and purposes, it's a straight line, right? So if you go back in here, how do you get back in here?
You trying to get to that map?
Oh, I gotta minimize this. Yeah, there we go. So you're basically in this range here between 110 and 120 during your pull. Now, when you go drive your car, your engine load's gonna be all over the place. So when you tune the car in the dyno, depending on the type of dyno and how much time the tuner is gonna take to tune it, you can imagine that all these different cells, they have to have a very specific value. And on the dyno, because maybe for whatever reason, the way that load gets computed, the actual load on the car driven on the street could be slightly different. The dyno, they approximate things. There's resistance, there's a lot of math and estimating that happens, and compensations for temperature. For example, you get a car on a dyno on a hot day versus a car on a dyno on a cool day. Technically, the number should be the same from the dyno, because you're supposed to put that information into the dyno to tell it that it's hot outside, right? So the number really shouldn't be any different if it's cold or hot. But when you're tuning a car on pump gas, especially this type of vehicle, it's going to be knock limited. So generally advancing the timing will result in some point where you won't be able to add any more timing. And it looks like in your case, your tuner, whoever you were working with, looks like they just wanted to add as much timing as possible beyond what would appear to be a reasonable amount. Or maybe something changed. Maybe before the load was computed to be lower, or maybe before the load was computed to be higher, right? Maybe they tuned it, it was over here, it was running less advanced, and then now you're driving it, and on the street, that airflow is being computed differently somehow for whatever reason, right? Because anything that those MAF sensors see, and this is actually an interesting point, because with the upgraded intakes, anytime you do long tube intakes or you do any kind of modification to your air intake, you're going to end up in a situation where, especially under lighter load areas here, your accuracy for how accurately the load will be computed will become broader. And so in these areas here where you have a lot of jumping around in the values, like you have 9 here and you have 37 over there, right? You see how the color change? The more drastic the color change, the more important it becomes to have an accurate engine load, because any mistake between, for example, here is a 15 and over there it's 31, if your car is not able to accurately meter that airflow under those light load conditions, you're going to end up with light throttle knock, which is what a lot of these cars have. Like, I redo a lot of these for that issue. And as soon as it encounters that, then it, let's say, takes away 9 degrees of timing, and then you jump on the throttle, it jumps over here to 100% load, it's going to run, whatever this is, minus 9 degrees. The car is not going to have any power. So, and to tune all of this, it's not straightforward. It's kind of hard. You really have to take your time. You got to collect a lot of data. You essentially have to drive the vehicle through all these situations multiple times, because, sometimes you may not do it. Other times it might knock, and you have to statistically collect that data and adjust the vehicle based on the fuel that it's running, based on the health of all the sensors and the engine condition. If you want to get the absolute maximum power out of it, given the fuel, and maintain the safety, it's a lot of work. Does that all make sense?
Yes, that's what I was kind of like. All these numbers are confusing to me, but they're starting to make a little bit more sense.
Yeah, don't worry about the numbers so much. They basically talk about, how, at what point does the spark plug going to be lit? And in this table in particular here, the higher the number, the earlier the spark plug will be lit. Generally, the earlier you light it, you get higher cylinder pressure, which means the engine will put out more power. Okay, so does that answer all your questions, or do you have other questions?
No problem. I'm just, I just want to know what you think, what you see in my tune that could be, I know you suggest tuning, so, we might as well.
Yeah, I don't really have access to, I don't think we have access to your old tune. If we did, it'd probably be locked. Okay. So I have a few tools available that I can run on your data logs and rebuild some of these maps. And then, within a certain amount of accuracy, of course. And I can use that to go forward and make additional adjustments. But typically what I'll find is that I need to start over from scratch, because the way I like to do things is pretty different from how, the other guys are doing it, and just kind of do it my own way. But in general, the result is for me to optimize your car to the point where you get the best fuel economy under a light load, as you can see here. Light load of the timing map is over here on the left, and of course, best power under the hand on the right hand side. So you really can have the best of both worlds. Just all depends on how you compute your engine load. Does that make sense?
I've definitely heard a lot about you. I don't see a lot about you, but I've heard a lot about you. So that's something I can justify doing. I'm really concerned about this tune. It's just, it has to be looked into.
All right, let's do it. Let's tune the car. I'll check for firmware updates, and then go ahead and set up Dropbox on your computer, and you get that set up, and I'll share some folders with you where you can upload your logs. I'd like you to collect a couple 100 megabytes of data if it's possible, and then we'll do some analytics on it and see what we can get going for you.
Okay, so how do I go about doing this? Is something we're gonna download Dropbox? I've never really heard of this stuff, so
yeah, I'll walk you through it. If you go to Dropbox.com, they usually have. Let's visit their website. I think you might actually have it installed already. There's something there, so you might already have it. It says, yeah, you have Dropbox installed, but if you didn't, you would probably install it. That's typically what I ask people to do. So I guess that's it for now. Let's start doing some work on this, and let's see where we can get.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No, not to this point. Thank you.
All right. Let's talk soon.
All right.
Thank you.